Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show. This episode is sponsored by Agenda 14. Learn more at agenda.com.
The export styles, as they call them, which are the things that generate ePubs or PDFs or whatever, and it's being able to create custom ones of those that has allowed me to publish entirely from the iPad and not have to go back to the Mac for anything at all.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. I'm thrilled to be joined once again by Matt Gemmell, the author of numerous books including the Kestrel series, the Once Upon a Time series, and the recently released Middleshade Road. He was also a guest on episode 40 of this podcast back in December of 2018. So check that out as well if you like what you heard today. In this episode, we discuss how his writing process has changed, how he is now able to publish directly from the iPad, which he couldn't do when the last episode was recorded. He needed to go back to the Mac to finish things up. How Trackpad support has changed things for him, focus mode, and much more. As a reminder, this episode is sponsored by Agenda 14, which was just released a couple of weeks ago. It is available now for free in the App Store, and I'll have more to share on Agenda 14 later on in this episode, diving deep into how this new smart menu bar system works. If you are a keyboard person that likes fast entry, this is something you'll want to hear about later on in this episode. Download Agenda now for free in the App Store to get started with one of my favorite apps that I continue to use year after year. With that, here's my interview with Matt. Enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you so much, Tim. It's a pleasure to be back.
And it's been a while. So December 2018 was the last time we spoke, and it's now April 2022. So a good 3 to 4 years here.
Which have felt like about 35 years for all of us, I think.
Yeah. So for those that haven't listened to that original episode back in 2018, you should go back and listen to it. But can you kind of introduce yourself and what you do for work?
Absolutely. My name is Matt Gemmell, and I'm Scottish, believe it or not, in case you can't hear that. I am a novelist. I used to be a consultant software engineer for a number of years, but for the past few years, I've been writing books full-time.
Excellent. And you've written a number of them, and one just came out in February.
That is true. It already feels much longer than 2 months since then, but yes, a horror novel called Middleshade Road came out in middle of February this year, as you say, and it was a great pleasure to get a book out in the first part of the year. Often it's summertime or later on. I kind of feel like I've got one in the bank for 2022 already.
Yeah. So how many books does this make it for you?
I think that's 5 books at the moment, and deep in the middle of the 6th one, which is the 3rd in the techno thriller, the EU-based techno thriller series that I do. Plus there were 2 book-length collections of flash fiction, sort of really micro short stories, and also, as we said, this standalone horror novel back in February.
That's awesome. With the micro short stories, do you kind of write that alongside other books that are as like a cleanse to like just like focus on something for a little bit, then jump back to the bigger books, or how does that work for you?
It's a constant thing for me, actually. What I do is it has multiple purposes. I write one every single week, and they go out in an email newsletter, a free email newsletter that people can sign up to on my site if they wish. And it's a way to, as you say, as a bit of a palate cleanser in between my actual work, and a way to keep practicing and to try new scenarios, maybe to play with a story idea that might become a longer piece of fiction in the future. And of course, from a deeply cynical marketing standpoint, it gets people onto my mailing list, and I can then tell those people about the actual books that come out later. And of course there's this 4th purpose in that I can periodically collect them together into a beautiful big compendium with author's notes and so on, and it's another book to put on my shelf here.
That's awesome. And have you noticed your process changing much during these 5 books? Like for your first book, how have things evolved since now book 5 and 6?
I think I've gotten better at it, and I don't say that to praise myself, but more because it would be incredible if you didn't get better at something, doing it on a constant basis. I with the first book, I did take a bit of a sort of slapdash, an approach that's called pantsing in the writing community, make it up as you go. And I very quickly realised that approach is not for me, and I'm definitely the other kind of writer, which is a planner. So I've gotten a lot more disciplined about fully outlining things and working from an outline and sort of taking a structured approach, which in retrospect shouldn't really be a surprise since I'm coming out of a software engineering career and I've very much got that sort of mindset and that approach to life. You also learn a lot about just the art behind writing a piece of fiction that's almost 100,000 words in length in terms of foreshadowing and themes and balance and pacing and all these sorts of things. It's maybe not lessons that you can consciously regurgitate, but you do notice that the process becomes more instinctive and more intuitive. And I suppose that's true of learning to do anything.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And has your tool or like applications you use for the outlining, brainstorming process changed over the years?
I can't remember exactly what I was using when you and I last spoke about this, but at the moment I am a very heavy user of GoodNotes, which of course is one of this sort of cluster of lovely handwriting and sketching and drawing sort of based note-taking apps on the iPad. There are plenty of those, Notability and so on. GoodNotes is the one that I've sort of grown up alongside. And I tend to use that at the earliest stages as a sort of digital whiteboard, I suppose, just to get things together and start to see where ideas could cluster together, I suppose. And then I tend to, once I feel that I've got the kernel of something, I tend to then move into MindNode, which is actually, previously it was just a mind mapping application, of course, hence the name, but it's grown into quite a capable outliner in the manner of Omni Outliner and various other apps. So I tend to use that both as a mind map and as an outline, and you can flip the same document interactively between the two presentations at any time. And that's what I use to build a full, in inverted commas, because you can never really have a full outline for a book, it always changes whilst you're writing, into a full outline that I then take into my writing tool. And the way I do it is essentially I take the next scene worth of outline, put it into a new document in Ulysses, in my case, which is my writing tool, and I make a couple of blank lines at the top of that chunk of outline and I start writing, and I just delete the next bullet point once I've covered it. So the next thing I need to write about is almost immediately beneath my cursor, and I know when I'm done with the scene because there are no more bullets.
Yeah, that's really cool. And mind mapping for me has been a really powerful tool. For the one and only book I've written, a nonfiction book about the iPod, that mind map was just ginormous, and that format kind of does let your brain just kind of like explode things out in different ways, and really lets you see things in a different way from other tools out there.
It's true. I used to mind map a bit back when I was at university doing my computing science degree, but I've actually found that mind mapping on the iPad, funnily enough, with a physical keyboard connected, is the most intuitive way for me, simply because I can type an awful lot faster than I can draw out, text and bubbles and things.
Yeah.
Draw connecting arrows, as I think most people can. And all of the mind mapping and outlining tools on the iPad, MindNode very much included, they have such wonderful keyboard shortcut support. So you can just be typing and it's firing off connections and drawing the map for you. And for me, at least the way my mind works, that seems to be the perfect balance of getting the benefit from that visual presentation of connected ideas, but still being able to input at a high enough speed that I'm not feeling I'm being held back.
Yeah. So when we last spoke, you were using the then fairly new 2018 iPad Pro, the 12.9. Is this still the same iPad you're using today to do all this work, or have you moved on to a different model?
I would say the answer to that is yes and no. No in a strictly sort of factual sense, because I'm using the 2021 iPad Pro 12.9 inch, but of course I'm a writer, so the stuff I'm doing isn't exactly taxing the machine.
Right.
So functionally, it could be that identical machine for the way that I use it.
Do you work in the dark mode and take advantage of the great blacks and stuff on the new screen?
I do. I found myself switching to those pure black versions of dark mode themes where apps offer it, because you just do get that beautiful contrast. I let it be in light mode during the day because I'm fortunate enough to have quite a light office, lots of natural light, and I'm on an upper floor, so it's very nice and bright in here. But in the evening time, I do love it switching to dark mode, although I have found in recent weeks that I'm having to switch it to dark mode myself and not wait for sunset, because of course that's getting later and later.
And that'd be the main thing, because you're probably not using Thunderbolts, I'm guessing, or using a bunch of RAM because you're writing books.
Yeah, I don't have any sort of storage type peripherals connected or anything like that. Literally the only thing I've got hooked up to the iPad is an external keyboard, and that's it. I mean, of course I've got Bluetooth headphones and things like that, but it's just the keyboard. Did
you ever get that Magic Keyboard, or is your iPad just kind of used in this desktop mode, I guess, tabletop mode? And when you're
I do have the Magic Keyboard. I had the what is it, Space Gray one for the previous iPad Pro that I had. Maybe I had it when you and I spoke. Mm-hmm. I can't actually remember when they released that. But I went for the white one, the white Magic Keyboard this time, because the same reason anyone does. They see a new colour, it looks cool, you fancy a change, and it is a beautiful thing. It's also much more fingerprint resistant than the darker version, I have found.
I was going to ask. It's holding up. It's not getting all grimy.
Oh gosh, no, it's so much better. I remember when I got the first Magic Keyboard for the iPad, and took it out of the case and oohed and ahed over it and connected it up and looked at it, and there were fingerprints on it already from myself within literally the first minute. Whereas the white one, I'd be hard pressed to notice any marking or discoloration. But of course, as you say, I use the iPad on a desk during the day, and I only tend to grab the Magic Keyboard when I'm maybe taking the iPad downstairs in the evening to sit on the couch. So it's an evening and travel thing, although travel has been extremely hypothetical in recent years.
Yes, it has. And with the fingerprints, are you talking about like the keys and trackpad area or the exterior part?
On the keys and the trackpad surround area.
That stuff can show for sure.
Yeah, you do see the markings on it, and the dark grey material of the previous one. I'm not sure if they've changed the actual material since, but it was, as I say, literally within a couple of minutes, whereas the white, to my eye, still looks brand new even now. And I got it whenever they released this.
A couple of years now.
Last May or June or something.
Very cool. I opted for the gray one because I just I use it a lot as a stand to watch movies, and having a big white thing there seemed like it might be distracting for that use of it.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah. I just I wanted the aesthetic. I've got a very defined sort of aesthetic, and I got the silver backed iPad Pro this time instead of the Space Gray
that's
one.
The way to go. That's what I got as well.
It is a beautiful thing. And I've got my keyboard is white, my external mechanical keyboard that I have, and my headphones are as close to white as I could get a pair of Sony XM4s to be. It's a sort of funny grey colour. And I've got my one sort of nod to fun on my desk is one of the new OLED version Nintendo Switches, and that's of course the white one with the white Joy-Cons. So it's got a nice sort of, it's white with black highlights, and then my walls are purple and my desk mat is purple. Purple's my colour. So I have a very defined aesthetic. So it had to be the white Magic Keyboard, even though it only sits on the desk occasionally.
Did you pick up a Magic Trackpad when you're in that tabletop mode, or do you just use the keyboard and touch?
I use touch a little bit, although I've got my iPad far enough back and up on an inexpensive metal stand that I would need to reach for it. I've got two ways of using pointer control. One is the keyboard itself, because I've got a fancy mechanical keyboard that I've customized, so it can be turned into a mouse or a scroll wheel or whatever by pressing various combinations of keys.
Oh, that's wild.
And I also recently got one of those sort of trackball mice where there's a big sort of thumb ball instead of moving the physical mouse around. Just as a kind of ergonomic consideration, I'm trying that out and quite liking it so far.
How's the keyboard thing work as far as using it as a pointer? I'm curious. Can you dive a little bit more into that?
Well, this is mechanical keyboards are one of my things, one of my sort of nerdy weird hobbies. So I have a keyboard called a Corn, Corne, and it's a split mechanical keyboard. So it's got two little keypads, one to the left and one to the right, separated by a cable. It has got 34 keys in total, so a very small number of keys. And the way it works is there are sort of keys on it which, when pressed, much like the shift key, change what the other keys do whilst that key is pressed. So it's got this concept of layers. And I had to build the keyboard and compile the firmware for it and make the key map for it and choose the lighting beneath the keys and all that sort of thing. So it's a completely custom gadget. It's like a hobby thing. So I just have a layer where some of the buttons that are normally cursor keys, they turn into the corresponding mouse keys when another button is held at the same time, and so on. I have written a far too long blog post about it, and the key map is open source on my GitHub, and there's a diagram of how it all works. If people want to check it out, they can get a link from the blog part of my site.
That's super cool. Since we last spoke, the iPad mini got some love with a redesign. Does this tempt you as a secondary little iPad to have on the couch?
The temptation is always there, particularly since it has the same form factor as the iPad Pro, but I've yet to succumb to it for the reason that it's still 400 odd quid or whatever it is. And I know that it would just be another thing to play with and to update and so on. And I just really don't see how I would use it as an ancillary device for my main iPad. The thing I love about the iPad Pro is that it transforms. So you just take it off the stand and it becomes a drawing slate or a 2-up book or whatever you want it to be. And I just don't really feel the need for having a small device like that. When I look at the iPad mini, I can see how you'd want to use it maybe for games or watching media. But in a work context, something that size to me is a notepad. It's something to scribble on, particularly since it has the magnetic Apple Pencil support now. And the Quick Note feature on iPadOS 15 kind of obviates that, because I can do that on the main iPad, have a sort of separate floating notepad at the same time. So for that reason, I'm sort of even less in the market for the iPad mini.
Interesting.
It's a beautiful device, but I don't personally really see a space for it in my workflow at the moment.
Yeah, if the price point was more appealing for that as a secondary device. If it became
more of an impulse buy, then possibly. But honestly, it would. My wife would probably tell me it was a silly impulse purchase that would end up sitting on a shelf, and she would invariably be correct about that.
So how do you find the larger sized iPad? Because that's the one I use. I use the 12.9. How do you find it kind of when you're lounging around on the couch and using it for non-desk work?
It's in that sort of range of weight whereby it's wonderful and sleek for the first few minutes, but after that you think, how can I lean this against my knee or something?
Where's the nearest pillow to prop it up?
Exactly. And so for that reason, I've got a beanbag thing. They have these little beanbags you can buy that are about perhaps the size of a soccer ball or less. And they're approximately sort of pyramid shaped, but of course being fabric around the beanbag, you can reshape it however you like. And it's designed as a sort of lap rest for a tablet type device. And you can of course choose your own angle, since it's just a lot of little styrofoam beads inside a cloth bag. And I have one of those, and I find that if I'm doing something like working on my schedule for the next day, which I do in GoodNotes, or if I'm editing, sort of reading through, proofreading, editing in Ulysses, which I do with the Apple Pencil using the scribble feature in iPadOS, then I tend to leave the Magic Keyboard upstairs and I just use the beanbag with the iPad, and that of course takes care of the hand and wrist fatigue of holding the thing up whilst you're using it. and I just leave the beanbag sitting on my office couch when I'm not using it with the iPad, and it can serve as a occasional pillow for a wee cheeky afternoon nap.
That's great. Yeah, I had like a beanbag thing designed for the iPad back in 2010, and I'm not sure where that ended up. It was so nice though. It had a little wooden like cylinder thing towards one end, so it had a prop up point as well to it, which is cool.
I think mine is just fabric, but it does have a pocket in the side of it. You're meant to put your phone in, but I don't know who these people are who allow their phone to, be away from their person, even if it's just on the lap. Mine is always in my pocket.
Yeah, I wouldn't want a phone where that would be placed if it's on my lap.
No, indeed not.
Yeah, no. So you mentioned a new stand since we last spoke, or a stand. I'm not sure if you've changed it up. I know. So I use the Hoverbar Duo that came out fairly recently, like a year or so ago. And then I know there's the magnetic ones, the Mag Float, and there's all sorts of options now. What did you settle on to use?
It's such an inexpensive / affordable / cheap / it's probably on Amazon under 6 different brand names.
Oh, I see.
From China type ones. So I'd need to look it up for you, but it's the reason I chose it over my previous one, which is a Lamicol, is simply that it lets me lift the iPad up higher off the desk for a better eye line. I pretty much only have the iPad in landscape mode for my work. The only time I flip it to portrait is if I'm doing a video call. So this one, it's just got a big metal base, and it lifts the thing up perhaps 10 or 12 centimeters, I suppose, off of the desk surface, and that just suits me fine. But yeah, I have absolutely no recollection of its brand name.
Yeah. So you spoke about the trackpad a bit ago. You have a mouse and on the keyboard. How in practice do you find that has impacted kind of your day-to-day use? You're able to have the iPad further away, which is good, but how have you found it overall?
I find that I'm sort of constantly playing a game of cat and mouse with Apple on this, because every time I get a stand or a pointing device or something that's designed to make it easier to interact with the parts of iPad OS that don't yet support keyboard navigation, Apple then invariably enhances the keyboard navigation, so they obviate those devices. The tab key focus thing that came in iPad OS 15, was it 15.0 or later?
I think it was with the initial release, you had full keyboard navigation of the OS.
So that adds so much, and it does take away a lot of the need for using a pointing device. The one thing that I constantly get annoyed by and have to use a pointing device for is when you go to a website and, of course, the thing pops up at the bottom offering to log you in with credentials that are already in iCloud or in 1Password or something, and you get that big blue button that you just need to tap to make iPad OS fill in the password information, and there doesn't seem to be a keyboard shortcut to trigger that big blue button. Return doesn't work because you're in a form field that would submit the form. So I often need to click that incredibly annoying button.
I wish there was a setting to do like an intentional 2-eye blink and have that trigger it or something.
Anything. I would perform almost any contortion to not have to, like a caveman, reach for that massive big blue button. I cannot imagine why there's not a keyboard shortcut for it, but that is one of the things that keeps me using the pointing device, and indeed one of the reasons that I configured a pointing device layer on my keyboard just to hit that login button.
Yeah. So we've talked about your writing process a bit. Has your marketing and promotion process changed since we last spoke? It's been a bit here.
I suppose the weekly stories and that whole system of things counts as a change, because one of the most important things as a writer, not just as a writer, as anything where you're selling your own stuff, but one of the standard things in the writing community is that you got to have the mailing list. So I've been focusing an awful lot more on that. But the problem is always getting the word out to people. The bookstores, whether it be Amazon or Apple Books, they've gotten a bit better about automatically sending email recommendations when a new book comes out from an author whose work you've already read. I'm sure we've all received those emails. My wife likes to laugh when Amazon sends her an email to ask her if she was aware that Matt Gemmell has a new book out. Yes, she probably was aware, more aware than most. Other than that, I'm trying to be more consistent with blogging and writing an awful lot more about stuff that's directly relevant to my writing. I think previously I had that transition coming out of software engineering, but I was clinging with my online presence onto my old persona, I think, and I've taken the opportunity recently to just completely redesign the site and refocus it and accept you're an author now, and writing about tech is always going to be a sort of secondary hobby thing. Mm-hmm. The two worlds have switched places. The hobby has become the job has become the hobby. And I'm just trying to keep going that way. It's just a matter like building a following in social media or anything else. It's about consistency and momentum and long periods of time and a bit of luck.
Yeah. And you mentioned Ulysses is your writing app these days. That app's had a lot of, improvements since they moved to that subscription model. What have been some of the big things they've added over the years that you feel have really impacted your work in positive ways?
The wonderful thing about Ulysses is that they are extremely reluctant not to add features necessarily, but to add user interface. They like to keep it extremely simple in presentation and to keep it quite conceptually pure. That's my interpretation as an outsider. But they do occasionally add features that do present themselves more obviously in the user interface, and it's little conveniences that make a big difference. Things like applying coloured labels and applying tags to sheets, which is the name for documents in Ulysses, and having colours associated with those tags. It seems like a sort of simple organisational construct, but when you're writing a novel, what you can do is you can use those, for example, to track which scenes contain conflict, and you can use them to track which scenes are from the point of view of the protagonist and the antagonist, and it creates this sort of flow of colour, and you can get a visual representation, even in your writing tool, of the balance of points of view and the pace of conflict and all this sort of thing. So I've found that enormously useful. I also obviously appreciate the customizability of the theme for the editor to some extent, although you could work with black text on a white background readily. But what I appreciate is the ability to customize the export styles, as they call them, which are the things that generate ePubs or PDFs or whatever, and it's being able to create custom ones of those that has allowed me to publish entirely from the iPad and not have to go back to the Mac for anything at all. Whether I'm generating ePubs for KDP, that's the Amazon Kindle store, or for Apple Books or the other ebook bookstores, or generating the interior PDF page masters for paperback printing, I can do all of that straight from Ulysses using the export styles that I've created, and that's enormously freeing. It also allows me to do a lovely little thing, which is, I'm not sure if I'd started this by the time you and I previously spoke, but I do autographed ebooks, whereby people buy an autographed ebook and they tell me what name they'd like inscribed, and I basically generate a custom EPUB where I sign the cover art for them, so it shows up in their ebook reading application or their reading device like a Kindle or a Nook or whatever it is. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, and it's incredibly simple for me to do, because it's a matter of, I have a shortcut that helps me, of course, but essentially it's duplicating a JPEG of the cover in the Photos app, then using markup with the Apple Pencil in Photos to do the signature, and then taking that into Ulysses, generating the EPUB and wrapping up in an email to that person, and away it goes. And it takes a couple of minutes, and it's a lovely thing for people to have. It's been really popular. Hundreds of people have got these things, and it's just a delightful thing to be able to do that gives you a wee taste of that author sitting at a table signing books for people, sort of part of the lifestyle that writers want, without having to step away from your desk.
Yeah, that's super creative solution, because ePubs, once you're actually inside of it, they're generally, I guess there can be images, but generally it's text. So the cover, which you see every time you open it, is kind of where you'd want that rather than kind of in the first couple pages of a book like traditionally would be done.
That was my feeling. You would most often have a signature, perhaps sometimes inside the cover or on an epigraph page if there is one, or the title page, perhaps. But as you say, it's so hidden. And I thought back when I was wondering how to do this, it was prompted by someone's suggestion on Twitter. I thought that if it was something I was getting for myself, I would want to be able to see it every time I looked at that virtual library of book covers in Apple Books or on my Kindle's home screen. So having the signature on the cover, it makes people smile every time they see it, whether they've already read the book or not, and it generates that personal connection. And what I've found is that people who get an autographed EPUB of one book in the series will invariably want to sort of collect the whole set in that manner.
And is it hard picking out a color to sign with so it's nice and clear, like a contrasting color to the cover?
Before Middleshade Road, which is that horror novel of mine that came out in February, I would have said, no, it's absolutely fine, because my techno-thriller series, the Kestrel series, they have extremely sort of strong theme colours on each book. So you're basically picking whatever colour is contrasted to that, and that's what you sign with. But Middleshade Road, it's got a much more sort of variegated cover with dark stormy clouds, and there's a lot of variation between sort of bright blues through to blacks. And yeah, it's really, really tricky, and you don't want to put a big plain coloured barcode-like box on it to sign within it. So sometimes I even sign those. I do the inscription in one colour and then do my signature in a different colour so that there's enough contrast. And then, of course, they put it on a Kindle that's black and white anyway.
Right. Yeah. And that's really cool to hear Ulysses can help you through this whole process now. Because I think before, in our last chat, you actually did need to finalize the file on the Mac, if memory is correct.
That sounds right.
Yeah,
I think there were two things involved there. I think there was some aspect of either the typography or the layout of producing perhaps the PDFs that I couldn't quite manage in Ulysses at that point. And the other thing was that the Kindle store, I think, only accepted their own
the Mobi files.
Native Kindle format, yes. But these days, KDP will take an EPUB and sort of transcode it for you.
That's really cool.
Those two things together make an iPad-only planning and writing and editing and publishing both to ebook and print workflow just so easy.
That's really cool to hear. Yeah, because Kindle is always the odd duckling, the quote-unquote monopoly that has to be different for everyone else.
Yes, with their DRM and their fancy formats. I mean, there is a purpose to it. They've got all these clever typography features and the what do they call it, X-ray, where you can sort of have metadata for characters and settings, and they do a lot of wonderful stuff.
And I know you can sync, if you're reading it, it can sync to your Audible version of that, which is nice.
It's incredibly clever. It's a wonder. That's almost magical the first time you play with it. And of course they've got highlights and definitions and so on. But no, they do accept a standard EPUB, and they do a wonderful job of converting it nicely, so I don't need to worry about firing up Kindle Preview or Calibre or something on the Mac to do that last bit of the conversion.
That's great, yeah. Yeah, Calibre is such an old, archaic tool, but it gets the job done.
Yes, it's like the 1980s mainframe sitting in the basement of a modern, shiny bank building that is completely indispensable, but no one wants to acknowledge that it's still there.
Yeah, so with the Ulysses exports, those are all custom things that you've managed to build, and did you have to build them in Ulysses on the Mac and then push them over to the iPad, and then once they're set up, they're good to go, or how's that work?
Exactly as you say, yeah. Right now, the editing of these export styles only happens on the Mac. In terms of having an interface for it in Ulysses, I think there are ways that you can do it on the iPad in an external text editor like Textastic or something, and then sort of save or open the file, and Ulysses will open it. But in terms of having a GUI to create a new style, put your name on it, create a preview image, etc., you do currently need to do that on the Mac, but it's a one-time thing. I did it a few years ago, and then that was it, finished. And it's basically like It's very much like a big sort of fancy CSS file, cascading style sheets for the web. And it defines how it will output certain things. And once you've got it the way that you want it, it syncs just like your actual text library. The styles sync over to the iPad as well. And then you've got it, and you can just export as many times as you like.
Nice. And audiobooks, is that something you've explored at all in these couple of years?
I've looked into it. They're extremely popular, and when you put a novel out that people enjoy reading, you will have requests for an audiobook version straight away. So the problem, of course, or not the problem, but the potential stumbling block is the cost.
Yeah, it's a time-intensive thing to produce.
It's massively time-intensive, or it's extremely expensive, or some combination of the two. There are services that will do it for you, and they will either just take a huge fee to do it, quite understandably, because it takes them a huge amount of time, and they have a lot of equipment they need to have, and they've got so much editing to do. It's quite right that it's expensive. Or they can take a lower fee and a share of profits, but that requires that you can obviously demonstrate a certain number of readers, etc., etc. The third option would be, of course, to do it yourself, but that creates an enormous requirement of time. You need to have pretty hot audio equipment, a good place to do the recording, a huge amount of time to do the editing, and you have to have an accent that everyone can readily understand.
Yeah, I'm a huge audiobook person, and I can. Some of the production is just incredible. It's like, this must have taken just forever. This all perfect.
It's an art, like anything else. I mean, voiceover artists, which is what audiobook recording, services provide to you. They are absolutely artists.
Yeah, I mean, you have characters, and they're voicing out these. Yet you know who the character is before they say. At the end of the book, the sentence will said this character, but they're reading it in that tone before you even get that point, and it's it's an art. Yeah.
I think if I was to do it myself, you would have that delightful, it's a Scottish accent reading the book kind of thing, but I don't currently have an audio setup to do something like that. It's not something I'd want to put that amount of time into, because of course, particularly when you're working for yourself, time has a huge and very direct financial cost. It's time it's opportunity cost that you're losing on actually writing new books. And I'd rather leave that to a professional. It's something for the future and something I'm very keen to do, but that just sort of doesn't fit into the kind of marketing plan balance for me at the moment.
Yeah. Say you were to produce that kind of audiobook file, is it an easy thing to get into Audible and these other places?
In terms of sort of being accepted onto it?
Yeah, like publishing the actual audiobooks, is there?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's any kind of gateway to Audible. From looking at KDP, because Audible's an Amazon company these days, there is the interface when you log in as a publisher to set up paperbacks and set up ebooks. It looks like you can just do it from the same place.
Okay.
So I imagine you're able to just publish in the way that you're able to just publish an ebook or a paperback, but I've not gone through the process, so I would defer to their official information on that.
This episode is sponsored by Agenda, which just rolled out version 14. In this quick break, I want to share about their awesome new smart menu bar for iPad in Agenda 14. The theme for Agenda 14 is autocompletion. And one huge way that is done is this new smart menu bar that will show up at the very bottom of the screen. This menu bar works for a bunch of different things, including tags, people, links to other agenda notes, and actions. So here's how this works. While you are typing in any note body, you can type one of 4 different characters to invoke this smart menu system. By typing the @ symbol, that will invoke the people bar. It'll have your most popular people you include in notes. If you don't have any people, you can start typing the name and it'll create that person. You can even now include a parentheses around that person's name to have their full name included with the space. If you forget that, you can just tap on their first name after you hit the spacebar to go in and edit the name to include their full name. This new system of using parentheses or going in and editing works for tags too. So if you have multiple word tags, these are now fully supported in Agenda 14. The second smart menu bar is for tags. Type the # to get into that. It'll have your most used tags right there. Just like in the People menu, you can tap on it to edit that tag. The third smart menu bar makes it super quick to link to other agenda notes and is one of my favorite additions to Agenda 14. Simply type 2 square brackets, that's the key right next to the P key on your keyboard. In this new menu, you'll first have your overviews, then your projects. When you click into a project, it'll then list all the notes of that project. A cool little trick with this is you can type recent to have it show you all the recent notes you've worked on. And a little trick to all of these smart menu bars is you can fully navigate them with an external keyboard. Once there's a smart menu bar, simply hit the down arrow or up once you're navigating to navigate around these smart menu bars. Hitting enter will either apply that person, tag, or note, or with projects, it'll open that project up for you so you can select the note from there. In the past, linking to other notes was a bit of a process, and this new system makes it super quick and easy to do so. Once a note is linked to, it'll show up in the related notes sidebar, and it is a two-way thing, where when you tap on that link, the original note you came from will now appear in that sidebar. Those links are tied together through the system. It's really cool. The final smart menu bar is invoked with a backslash. This is a general purpose menu bar that has a lot of functionality, including if you type tag or person, it'll pull up those earlier menu bars we were working in. You can even select link event, where when you select that, the menu bar will have your calendar items up to date pulled up, and you can link that note to an event from today. I'll have more to share on this menu bar in the future because there's just so much functionality packed into it. If you are a fan of being fast and effective with your keyboard, you are going to love the power and flexibility this new system in Agenda 14 enables. Get started today for free by downloading Agenda in the App Store. Everything I share today is included for free, and if you like what you are using and want even more from the app, give the premium version a try. You get a ton of power user features that are yours to keep even if you never pay for Agenda more than that one time. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. That's www.agenda.com. Download Agenda today for free in the App Store. So besides Ulysses, Mind, Node, and GoodNotes, are there any other key applications that you use in the writing process?
It's not really in the writing process, but there's to call it a text editor is a grave disservice, but there is an app called Drafts that I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yeah, 10-year anniversary this week as we're recording.
There you go. So it's an incredibly flexible, customizable, indeed programmable, with a full JavaScript API, extremely flexible app for working with text. It's sort of a distant cousin to, I suppose, BB Edit or apps of that type on the Mac, and I actually publish those newsletters with the stories that I mentioned earlier using Drafts, because they need to go into certain HTML templates in order to be fed up to MailerLite, which is the distribution service that I use. And I also use Drafts as the way to get writing onto the blog, not just posts and the stories that are published there as well, but even content for the pages and things like that. Ulysses is, of course, a markdown editing environment, but it's very stripped back just to focus on the writing itself, whereas sometimes you need something that lets you just work with text and to manipulate it in various ways. So I keep Drafts in my dock for that, and I use it at least every couple of days.
So that's really cool. So the newsletter, you don't even have to go to a web client or their app to publish. You can do that entirely from Drafts and never open Safari to finish it.
The only thing I need to open Safari for is to literally paste the pre-made newsletter into the new campaign screen on MailerLite, but there is
okay, so you paste the HTML generated from Drafts into there.
That's right. Okay. I designed it as a sort of static page, then templatized it. It's got its own CSS, and I have a Drafts action. So essentially I finish writing the thing in Ulysses, share it using the share sheet in Ulysses to put it on the clipboard, go into Drafts and trigger the action I've written, and it produces this lovely, or at least passable, looking newsletter that's ready to go straight onto MailerLite. And indeed, there's an API for MailerLite, and drafts can do all kinds of network access with programmed via JavaScript. So I'm sure I could automate it at some point.
That's really cool. And for the writing of the short story itself, you're in Ulysses in like a short story group for that?
Yes, the Ulysses' philosophy is that you should keep all of your text there no matter what it is. And I find that actually makes a lot of sense because everything is searchable and you've got the same interface and the same keyboard shortcuts and so on. So everything from even emails, honestly, non-trivial emails, right through to the stories, content for the blog, of course, all of the books, even marketing materials, blurbs for the back of the books, stuff for Facebook, stuff for social media related to the books. It is all written in Ulysses in an appropriate sort of hierarchical set of groups, and then I just share it out from there as needed.
That's awesome. That's really cool. For the covers, the artwork, do you outsource that work, or is that something you handle yourself?
I outsource that. I use a cover designer because I would dearly love to be a graphic designer, and I can do certain things myself, but I think it's important to let professionals do their work, basically. Yeah. And
it's an important piece of the book. Like if it's not professional level, it'll show. Yeah,
that's it. People do judge a book by its cover, of course.
They do.
And you know yourself, if you're buying books, the first thing that makes you jump in from that listing, okay, it's maybe a little bit the description, but the cover really, really matters. So I would not want my comparatively childish scribblings or immature photo editing application usage to jeopardize something that's a result of months and months of work and pain and struggle. So no, I use an agency called Books Covered in the UK, particularly a gentleman called Stuart Batch, and he's done almost all my covers for me, including the Kestrel series and this whole series logo design. And I get a very large JPEG, high quality JPEG out of that, but also a layered file, Photoshop, but I use Affinity Photo on the iPad, which is a magnificent photo editing app. So I can repurpose things like the cover backgrounds to use as banner images and, turn it into a full cover wraparound with a spine, etc., which is something you can only do at the very end of the process because, of course, the spine width depends on the page count, which depends on the final typographical layout, which depends on having fully edited text, which depends on blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Quick Notes earlier. How do you find yourself using this new kind of popover window that we now have in iPad OS?
I love Quick Notes. It's one of these Apple features where you love the idea so much that you try very hard to find reasons to use it.
Yeah. It's a whole kind of floating window, finally. What can I do with it?
Yeah. The wonderful thing about Quick Notes is that from a technical perspective, it's tied into all the same stuff that provides handoff and related features. So a quick note, as everyone has seen in the demo, is specific to the actual task you're doing on the iPad. So if you get a particular web page up and you take a quick note via highlighting something, it sort of sticks to that web page conceptually, so it comes back up as a suggestion in the corner when you go back to that same specific web page. It's I forget what iPad OS calls it. It's like a user intent or a user activity, I think. And the nice thing about Ulysses is that every single sheet is one of these user activities. So if you open the Quick Note window it's that drag up from the bottom right corner, when you're editing a certain sheet in Ulysses and you take a note there is that option sort of to tap a button on the Quick Note to insert a link to the Ulysses sheet, and it will come back up when you're editing just that sheet again.
Oh, that's cool.
You can do that for as many as you like, so you can literally use it to take notes that pertain just to that one specific document, and it will be represented to you when you come back to it, which is exactly what you would want. So what I find myself doing sometimes is that I'll use that as a place to make TK notes when I'm writing, or to just have a sort of first pass of things that I want to address later.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like your proofreading way of going about things.
Yeah, but sometimes when you're editing, you don't want to just immediately take action on something, delete a word or move a comma or whatever it is. It's something that you've noticed and you want to take some time to address later, to think about, to research. And quick notes are fantastic for that, because you can just sort of scribble over it or make a little drawing, or even like take a cropped screenshot and paste it in. And it gives you something that you can go straight back to, and indeed will jump up at you from the corner of the screen when you come back to it later.
And with Ulysses, I know some apps you can like highlight text and it'll reference that text in the quick note. Does that functionality work?
That doesn't work in Ulysses. I've only seen that in Safari, and I think maybe the Quick Notes API doesn't yet provide that to developers. I think that's a custom sort of special sauce thing just for Safari at the moment. But I'm sure if that facility becomes available in the Quick Notes API, which I imagine it will, I'm sure they'll take advantage of it, because it's so natural in the context of editing a piece of writing.
Yeah. So we've spoken about publishing out of Ulysses and how friendly the Amazon kind of backend has become. What's the Apple's backend like these days? And I know Apple Books, you can publish right through the Pages application now. That's a new thing since we last spoke, I think.
Yeah, I've never used the publishing via Pages feature. I assume that's quite a nice workflow. It's less pleasant when you're doing it outside of Pages, unfortunately.
Okay.
I think when the App Store and the iTunes Music Store all came about, Apple probably had to quickly hack together something to let music labels and other such executives log in and put their tracks up and get sales data and so on. And it was sort of hacked together. And initially, I think they just pretty much copy-pasted that to do the App Store when the App Store came along. Mm-hmm. But since then, the App Store developer portal has become much, 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 much nicer, because, of course, the App Store generates vast amounts of money.
Yes.
Whereas, unfortunately, the book side of things has, perhaps understandably, lagged behind. So it's split between these two different sort of portal sites. There's one where you log in and it's all gigantic buttons and it's all blue and white. Yeah. It's all sort of lovely looking, where you fill in a few nice fields and upload your cover and upload your ePub. And then it says, fair enough, now you have to bounce over to iTunes Connect to actually set up the pricing and the geographical distribution information. And then suddenly you're in, macOS 10.2 tiny buttons, and all the URLs have got like web objects stuff in them, and it's really slow and it's hideous, and it's lots and lots and lots of tiny pop-ups like a Windows 95 application. It's not the nicest, I have to say, but it's a necessary evil, and you get used to doing it, and we live in constant hope that they will update that side of things soon. Yeah,
we can hope, yeah. I've experienced some of that with the podcast backend and even some of the book backend. It's been a while since I've played around with that. But yeah, it is.
It probably hasn't advanced very much since you were last in at the book side of things.
Probably not, no. They did make the podcast side of things that when it launched, it wasn't very iPad friendly, and in the year since, it has become much more iPad friendly. So that's a good thing. They've been working on that at least.
At least there is someone there working on these things. Right. Whenever that intern gets around to the books side of stuff, I will look forward to that day.
Yeah. Do you have a process for testing the ePubs and the Kindles and do you load them up on eInk Kindles or Kobos or whatever they have?
Yeah, I mean, there's I have a beta reading process, which is what it tends to be called, a sort of proofreading with a set of trusted and jealously guarded people, where they get the book in various formats, which automatically tends to take care, because some people will put it on a Kindle, some people will put it on read it in Apple Books on an Apple device, people put it on the Nooks and the Kobos and so on and so forth. But most of that's for proofreading and annotating. So in the Kindle case, you're getting highlight notes back, which you can export from Amazon. People use Pages, so you've got the actual highlighted comments that are native to Pages or the equivalent thing in Microsoft Word. That's mostly just for the content. But then, of course, once the layout is done, there's less to beta test there, because, as I say, I've made the sort of the corresponding export styles for Ulysses years ago, and they've been tested in the field so many times. And I'm writing novels, so it's not like it's a technical book about Swift or anything. There's not complex tables and
you don't have images breaking up pages and making it look all weird. Yeah.
A paragraph of text a few years ago is going to render the same way this year. So that aspect of it isn't too bad. But yeah, we absolutely always get a chance to see it on all these different devices, if for no reason other than that this house is littered with eInk Kindles. Maybe you're the same, I don't know, but you log into Amazon to look at your devices and you're horrified when it's saying sort of, send a sample of this book to Matt's 9th Kindle or something. Right. Oh my God, have I had that many? But yes, we have had that many. So I've got plenty of test devices around the house if I need them.
Do you have a favorite eInk device to read on?
Yeah, the one I use right now is not the latest, but the previous generation Kindle Oasis.
Okay.
The one it's the same form factor as the current one, but it doesn't have the sort of yellowish, softer backlight. It's got the whiter backlight.
That's the big one?
Yeah, that's right. It's the one that has it's sort of slightly, it's thicker at one end, although it's only like, half a centimetre or something.
Yeah.
And it's very, very thin at the other end. It's got page turn buttons, but also you can use the screen. And as you say, it has a bit more of a sort of squarer overall form factor than a rectangle. And it's a beautiful thing to use. It has the usual limitations of eInk, the very jarring page turns every so often. It's very flashy, and it's not great to type on if you're searching the store on it, but it's a beautiful thing to hold. It's lovely to read on, and there are so many options for, I don't know about you, but I mean, I'm going to be 43 in a couple of months, so if I'm reading in the evening, I will quite often, just bump the brightness up one touch and bump the point size up a couple, and just to make it...
Yeah, light is important.
Yeah, make it easier on these old eyes, and it's wonderful for that. But the main thing I love about it is that because it's got that bump on the rear of it at one side, on the side with the page turn buttons, that's a natural place to hold it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's got the accelerometer feature from iPhones and iPads, so you can just flip the thing round and it flips the screen, so you can move it from hand to hand as you move, if you're leaning to a different side in bed or on the couch. That is actually, it's a simple thing, but it's the main feature I love about it, that it's got an accelerometer to flip the screen upside down when you move it to the other hand.
Oh, very nice, yeah. Yeah, with paper books, you can't exactly turn them upside down to...
No, you've got that. When you're in the middle of the book, it's fine, but if you're at the start or at the end, it's pretty ungainly. Yes. It's a difficult thing to hold. And
it can be.
The Kindle does take care of that.
So you mentioned shortcuts a bit ago. What are some of the other shortcuts you use, if any?
I don't use too many shortcuts, but the one that I use every day, I suppose there are two that I use every day, and I don't actually have to interact with them at all because they are automations that run on their own.
Aren't those awesome? I love that. That's the thing now.
They are great, and it's nice because Apple keeps adding new triggers for these things in the new iPadOS and iOS versions. One is dead simple, that if my battery gets beneath 40%, it automatically puts on the battery saving mode, which is very useful for the phone because I only upgrade every few years, so that maximum charge capacity does go down. But the one I use on the iPad is in concert with these new focus modes that we got on iPadOS 15. I've got a work one, of course, that disallows notifications from almost everything. I've got a few emergency contacts that I always have to take phone calls from. Like if my son's nursery phones for any reason, I obviously want that call to get through, but I don't allow any apps like email or social media to notify me. So my work focus is as simple as that. I don't have any extra home screens or anything for it. But when you've defined a focus, you can then make an automation in Shortcuts that is triggered when you either enter and or exit that focus mode, even if it's doing so automatically. So I basically have my work focus come on at 9 o'clock in the morning and then go off at midday, I think. And then it comes back on from 1 until 5 p.m. as well. And I've got an automation whereby when my work focus is enabled, it kills the Wi-Fi on my iPad. And for productivity reasons, because it's the best way to get things done. After a couple of times when your treacherous fingers automatically command tab to Twitter in a moment of indecision about the next sentence, and it just get that message you're not connected to the internet, that is so good for getting you back on task.
That's brilliant.
And the other thing the shortcut does is it starts a 2-minute timer, because there's this principle in productivity where the hardest thing to do is to get started. So basically, I sit down at 9 a.m. and it says, it pops. It's one of these automations that you confirm before running it. And the reason I make it do that is because if I'm 5 minutes late or whatever, it'll still be sitting on my screen ready to go. It's very possible to be 5 minutes late when you need to get a 1.5-year-old to nursery in the morning. And a 2-minute timer starts, and I know that I need to start writing within that first 2 minutes. Just knowing that a timer is running creates this huge pressure. So I quickly Command tab into Ulysses, type out the next sentence, and even if it's nonsense, the fact that you've written something just has that little effect of spurring you forward. I've already started today, there's already something, it's not a 0 day, I've got something there. The timer finishes, it doesn't make a noise because it's silenced and everything, and I've already done something. And then it does the same at 1 o'clock when I sit back down after my lunch with my wife. And those two things, killing the Wi-Fi and giving me 2 minutes to get started, they are incredibly effective.
And I love how it turns it off at a certain times and turns it back on. So if you're having lunch and turns back on work mode, it's like, oh, I need to get back to work. It's like you don't need to count. It's kind of calendaring out your day with focus mode, which I kind of love that notion.
Yeah, it's a wee gentle sort of nudge or nag, because of course when a focus mode comes on based on a schedule or some other automatic system, it slides this wee pill down from the top of the screen, much the same as the pill that comes down when you magnetically dock an Apple Pencil onto the top of the iPad. Yeah. It's a similar looking thing, and it just serves as a why aren't you back at your desk yet sort of nudge if I happen to still be downstairs. Yeah,
I use the sleep focus mode, and when that comes on for the cool down or whatever they call it, it's like, is it really already 9:30? It's like, oh, I guess it is.
Yep. No, it's tiny little productivity hacks like that I find make the most difference, and the fact that you've actually scheduled a time for it, that's one of the biggest sort of scientific takeaways for productivity. I think literally putting something in your calendar with a specific time on a specific day boosts your likelihood of completing it by over 90%. It's something ridiculous like that. It's this intentionality of scheduling, and I find that the focus modes pretty much have that effect, because you're going to see on the screen not just of your work device but your phone as well when you should be back at your desk.
Yeah,
and that's huge for someone who works from home and who theoretically has a completely flexible schedule. That's the enemy. What you need is the structure, and that's what the focus modes let me have.
Do you also use an Apple Watch?
I don't. I had one a few years ago, and I found it was too much. Too much to manage, too many things I could do on it. It's a wonderful device. It does some magnificent stuff. I particularly love the heart health features and the monitoring of irregular heart rate patterns, and it's incredible what it can do. And I watch the keynotes, and I love learning about the new features. But for me, it was just too much. I wear a mechanical wristwatch, and I do have some fitness watch, I think Garmin, at the moment, that I use just for tracking workouts.
Yeah, those are great. I know a couple people have them.
The main thing for me with the Apple Watch is that for me the battery life just isn't there yet. Fitbits and Garmin's, you're charging them once a week. And sometimes even less frequently. The idea of having a sort of constant tracking and monitoring fitness type device that you need to charge even once a day, that always just really annoyed me. I will gladly look at it again once they get that battery life up to the multiple days kind of.
Right. Yeah, they got the fast charging up, so now it fully charges in 45 minutes from 0, which is nice. But still, you are having to manage that a bit. I was going to mention, you can focus mode your watch, so you can like change out your watch face automatically if you're in work mode, which is kind of a cool thing.
No, it's great the way they've made all these integrations. The one thing they don't have that I really want is the screen time feature, where you can limit the amount of time you're allowed to spend in certain apps or websites. That really, I assume that iOS and iPadOS 16 will hopefully add integration for that. But what I wanted is, when I'm defining a work focus, for example, I also want to say, don't let me launch Twitter or YouTube.
Yeah.
That seems like an obvious feature, and I'm hoping they're going to integrate that, because that's the thing I miss most.
Yeah. Yeah, there are ways to not enable apps, but that's like on a pure time basis. That's right.
It's a time limit, yeah. What I've done is I've just sort of created a time limit for things like Twitter and Slack and YouTube and The Guardian and so on, and limit them to 1 minute, because you can't have a 0 minute, 0 seconds limit. You have to have some time, so I just limit them to 1 minute, so they immediately expire pretty much. So by the time I've checked Twitter briefly in the morning after I had my breakfast, then it goes, time's up, and that's fine. And then I wait to the evening and ignore for the rest of the day, so I can actually use social media at that point. But it's kind of a hack, and it just conceptually makes sense that you'd be able to prohibit certain apps and sites in a given focus. I just feel that that'd be a natural feature, and I hope that they'll allow that.
Yeah, it's just looking at that. It is a pure time limit. I thought you could actually schedule when that happened. I guess you can schedule downtime, which isn't the same. Yeah. Okay. They should add that. That's crazy. They don't have.
I think they fully plan to. I can only assume they do. They made screen time first, and the features for that were built out from the idea of monitoring how much time you're using an app for and how much time you're spending on things. So the limitations are based on amounts of time rather than a schedule or a focus mode. And then focus came later, a couple of years later, I think. And so they're still sort of catching up on integrating the features from previous years that make most sense there. But they seem so closely tied together that I presume there will be integration coming.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you don't have a unique home screen for work. Do you have any other focuses, like an entertainment focus, when you just want to just not see anything from work and just be in iPad land doing something else?
I think the only focuses I've got that are non-default, maybe even just the work one. Of course, the driving focus is something I passively use on an automatic basis whenever I plug the phone into the car. But I haven't defined any focuses for other modes, simply because when I'm doing things that are substantially other than work, I might not even be using the iPad at all, or I don't want any limitations on it because it's the evening and I want to mess about with personal projects or watch YouTube or something like that. So no, I think I've just got the default list with this work focus that's customized. Yeah,
it's a lot of work to have a focus mode where you're not trying to cut off notifications and people, but just change out your home screen. You can do it, but it's like, let me go one by one, select every person.
Yeah, I mean, I barely have a single home screen, never mind multiple home screens. I don't let the iPad show the app library thing. I have no apps other than a few in the dock.
Yeah.
I have an empty sort of desktop on my iPad and that's it.
Oh, wow.
I just don't want to see anything there. And also I never use it to launch apps. I always use Spotlight and keyboard shortcuts, and that's so natural to me after so many years of using a Mac back in the day that it just... For a device like the phone that's in your hand and your thumb's always millimeters from an icon, that's fine. But for the iPad, it just feels weirdly unnatural to me. I'm a keyboard man because I've been using computers for so long. So I can much more quickly initiate a Spotlight search and launch for an app that I want than even finding it on a grid of icons or pulling up the app library or things like that.
Have you played around with widgets? I know Ulysses has one. Is that something, rather than app icons having widgets, is that something you've played around with?
I've played around with it because, Apple announces a new feature and at WWDC or whatever, and then people use it in the betas and post on Twitter about it, and they're terribly excited, and then the official version comes out in September or whenever it is, and you install it and you're like, yeah, I'm going to play with all these new features, and then I use it for like a few hours and I think, nah, I preferred it the way it was, and I just turn it all off again.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's a couple that have been useful, but
there are times when I will temporarily put widgets up, like if I get parcels coming, or if my wife's traveling, or if there's some kind of contextual reason to have stuff sitting on the screen that I'm paying attention, that I can occasionally pay attention to, but there's nothing that I leave, sitting up there all the time. I just prefer the clean, empty aesthetic. I think back when I was using a Mac, I didn't even have folders lying about the desktop, and I switched off the display hard disks on desktop option in the Finder. I just prefer it empty.
Right.
And I changed my desktop picture or wallpaper, as we tend to more commonly say these days. I change that quite often, but even a lot of them are just custom things I made up in an image editor to say things like you should be writing.
Right. Yeah, that's something you could do with the automation. When you're in work mode, it could be a different wallpaper from the other mode.
I think I had a couple of automations to change the light and dark wallpapers at sunrise and sunset. I think maybe before dark mode was a thing.
Yeah.
But it was a bit unreliable, and I forgot about it. And of course now a lot of the Apple supplied wallpapers change automatically when they're in dark mode anyway, so it takes away the need for that.
Well, any other iPad related things you want to chat about before we wrap it up?
I think that was everything. I'm obviously very excited for WWDC and to see what is announced and what's next. But for me, because my needs are simple and they're not onerous on the machine, and I'm writing and focusing, and the iPad is kind of perfect for me in that it is a single app at a time. Just bury your head in it like a typewriter kind of device. I guess I'm a bit of a special case. I'm always excited by the features, as I say, and will be happy to play with them, but ultimately my work means that I have to go back to just black text on a white page that I stare at for hours. That's where I'm most at home, and that's where I get most work done. That's why I'm able to work full time on an iPad.
Excellent. What font do you write in typically in Ulysses?
Writing, I love Palatino.
Palatino,
It's a beautiful and pretty widely available serifed font. I do periodically switch back to the Apple system font just for a bit of a change, but I find that it's easier to read and easier to proofread, particularly if it's a font that's got serifs, and Palatino just looks beautiful to my eye. What I do is that when I'm proofreading, I bump the type up another couple of points because it's much easier to proof when the text is large and you can physically scan along it with the Apple Pencil's tip as if you were marking up a physical document. And then I take it back down when I'm actually writing. But yes, Palatino is the one.
Oh, and then I remember you mentioned Scribble. Is that something that works well for you, and how do you end up using that?
I tend to use Scribble just when I'm proofreading. I, of course, went through the wee honeymoon period with it when it was a new feature, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll use this with Spotlight and so on. But again, you find, you know what, it's not the quickest and it's not the most accurate way. But I do like it when I'm proofreading and just doing simple edits to documents, because you can scribble out a word and just the way you would on a printed proof. You can quickly insert, you can split words and join. It's just, it feels very natural, and it feels just fluid enough that you don't feel you're being hindered by it being a pen interface on a tablet device. So I do it for that. But if it's anything that's going to require a substantial rewrite, more than 2 or 3 words even, then I'll just put a TK in there and flip the iPad background, plug it into a keyboard, and do it that way.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, very cool. Where can people find your books and support your work?
Well, my name is Matt Gemmell, MattGemmell, and my site is at mattgemmell.com, all one word. And you can find me at Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, Waterstones, all of these places that you would find books. And if you want to sign up for those weekly stories, you can do that on my website as well. If you'd like to keep in touch via social media, I am on Twitter at Matt Gemmell and Facebook at Matt Gemmell Author, because, you know, my favourite username was already taken.
Right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really fascinating chat, and I've learned quite a bit, which is really good to do.
It was an absolute pleasure, Tim. It was great to speak to you again. Thank you so much.
Well, that was my discussion with Matt. My thanks to Matt for his time recording this episode, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. If you want to support this podcast, go out and download Agenda right now. My thanks to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.